Welcome to Champions Corner, where we have real talk with real caregivers, giving caregivers a voice, helping family caregivers to redefine normal and not feel so alone on their care journey, featuring the caregiving.com champions. Today, we'll be talking about finding local resources and support in your community. I am Christina Keys, your host, and I was a caregiver for my mother who had a stroke and also my ex-boyfriend who had a stroke. Let's go to our hosts.
Hi, I'm Carlos Olivas. I'm from Sacramento, and I care for my dad living with Alzheimer's.
Hi, everyone. My name is Felicia Phillips, and I was a caregiver for my father for 8 years. He had Parkinson's and Parkinson's-related dementia, and he passed away in December of 2023. And I'm currently a caregiver for my mother, who has Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, and a host of other chronic conditions.
I'm Elizabeth Miller. I cared for my parents who had chronic multiple comorbidities, and I'm currently a support caregiver for my brother who was born with an intellectual and developmental disability.
I'm Julie Roca, and I cared for my grandparents years ago. They had varying stages of Alzheimer's and other dementias.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for joining us today and being part of our panel. Let's go ahead and have Felicia get us started today.
All right. Thank you, Christina. And thank you, Julie, and Elizabeth for being with us today. We're going to kick this off by talking about resources. When you are thrust into caregiving or you make a conscious decision that you need to provide care for someone, then obviously you're looking for resources. So the first thing we want to tackle is how challenging was it to find resources and support during the caregiving journey? And I'm going to kick that off and just say that for me, it was an extreme challenge. I had no idea where to start. I had no idea where to look. I didn't know about caregiving because I found back then, 8 years ago in my circle that people weren't talking about caregiving. We were raising our children and, involved in our careers and things. People were not talking about caregiving. And so I did know that there were agencies like the Philadelphia Corporation for Aging in Philadelphia, where I'm from. But when I started caregiving, I didn't live in Philadelphia. So I had to do a lot of detective work. I had to ask around, talk to people. The only real person that I knew who had been a caregiver was my mother. She cared for my grandmother who had Alzheimer's for over 10 years. And couldn't necessarily go to my mother because she was, in fact, the person that I was caring for. So I would say for me, it was an absolute challenge, really frustrating. And, I hope that through vehicles like the Champions Corner and the champions that we're talking to today, that we can help make it less frustrating for others. So I am going to ask, Julie, why don't you tell me how challenging was it for you?
Well, we started giving care for my grandparents back in the 90s, and those were dial-up days. So in order for me to find information, because we had never really dealt with it either, I lived in a rural community, and I would go and search something out online. And I would go and do a load of laundry, actually, because it took so long for the page to pull up. So we tried to research resources online as much as possible because we didn't know. And so those were the days of dial-up. It's a lot faster now, and I'm very grateful for those much faster page loading times. And Elizabeth, I think that you were going to share some too.
Happy to share. I didn't even self-identify, frankly, as a family caregiver. So I didn't know what to put into the browsers to search for resources. I first self-identified, I guess, as a sandwich generation caregiver, not a caregiver, but sandwich generation, caring between, kids, raising kids and caring for older adults at the same time. I'm an avid reader. So my first kind of thought was like, I'm going to go on Amazon. I'm going to look for books. Well, when you're drinking from the fire hose and a full-time working caregiver and juggling all these things, you don't have time to read these books. I wish I could just put my finger on it and soak all the knowledge in. And because my parents had multiple chronic conditions, there wasn't like a single place to go to get resources like you would with, Alzheimer's or a stroke or cancer or something like that. So I was completely lost.
Thank you so much. I think that you're not the only one who was lost. And again, so grateful that we have a lot of the resources that are in place now and the things that we're going to talk about. I'm hearing lack of time. We're busy. We're drinking from the fire hose, lack of technology, dial up, and so many things that made a job that was already super difficult and one that we didn't really know how to navigate even more challenging. Christina, why don't you tell us what it was like for you?
Well, for me, I had no idea what a caregiver even was. I remember one of my Facebook memories came up after my mom had her stroke, and it said, does anybody know if they have, like, I don't know, people who are babysitters, but for adults? I didn't even know it was called a caregiver. And here I was, a caregiver. And when I was in the hospital, because I lived with my mom in the hospital when she had her stroke for a couple months, and I asked I didn't know, I asked every doctor that came in, every social worker, every, chaplain, like, what do I do? How do I do this? And I would even, if I was tired, I would even ask if I could record them, like, I don't know what to do. And they just let me wheel my mother out, who was paralyzed and had all these medical conditions, with a list of in-home care agencies, but they didn't tell me, one, it wasn't covered. They didn't tell me how to use the in-home care agencies. I thought they had to be there 24 hours a day, and also senior living, but I knew I was going to keep my mom at home. So I didn't know about all the resources. And so some of those challenges, it caused me to have to figure out how to do it all on my own. And I didn't know that you could ask different people. I didn't know even what to look for. Again, I didn't even know as a caregiver, right? And so what that did for me, having to figure it out all on my own and not tapping into resources in the community, is actually, like, 3 years into my care journey, I was so stressed out and overwhelmed. The doctors told me, you have like 6 months to live, because my body was literally shutting down, trying to figure out how to do it on my own. And it was a very interesting journey of how I found the resources in my community, but it wasn't until I was near death myself that I was able to actually look for those and find those.
Thank you, Christina. You just brought up some things that I hadn't even thought about. Oftentimes we think that things are covered. When you do kind of begin to figure out that there may be some resources out there, it's like, okay, is this covered by Medicare? Is this covered by Medicaid? Do I have to pay out of pocket? I remember my mother being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I had taken a day off of work to go to the neurology appointment with her. And the doctor basically telling me she has all this plaque on her brain. She needs 24/7 supervision, and, like, sending me on my way. And I was in the middle of, like, a new job, still had, children at home, older children, but still children at home, a marriage, a career, all of those things. And we're just kind of tossed out there. And so I absolutely, everything that everyone has said so far has really resonated with me. Carlos, why don't you tell us, I know you probably agree with much of what we've already shared, but tell us what your journey was like as far as finding the resources when you, like most of us, probably had no idea what this even was and where to start.
Right. I completely resonate with everybody that talked about finding resources, or even self-identifying as a caregiver. 2015, my dad was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. The doctor pretty much just said, this medication that we're going to prescribe for him is going to slow down his memory loss. And that was it. There was no other information of how to proceed, what works for communication with a person with memory loss, and what's the next steps? Where do we go from there? Was there a map? Was there, a list of things to follow? It was 2017, after a neurologist appointment, we got in front of a social worker. Social worker handed me a folder and said, these are the local community resources here. And then again, we didn't really understand how to kind of decipher what was in that folder, who to call, how to follow up, how to understand building out the resources that were provided into your caregiver situation. In the beginning, I identified as the supervisor, supervising my dad's health. But in reality is I was a full-fledged caregiver. And it had some type of a stigma with me. I didn't relate to it. It was hard for me to adapt. So it's a challenge, finding resources that work and how you can apply that into your caregiver journey. And I, as an active caregiver right now, I'm doing that all the time. I find the resources, kind of educate myself on that, and then evolve to see if it's something that I can implement into this journey or if something that I may need in the future. So it's hard to kind of really understand how this can help benefit your caregiver experience. And it's hard. I think it leads to the next question is like, how do you go about assembling local care team for your loved one? And the follow-up question is, what tips would you offer caregivers looking to create a strong support network? I'm going to start off with Julie.
Thank you, Carlos. So we were very fortunate because we had a lot of family that lived really close, and we realized my mother was the primary caregiver, but we realized quickly that it was way too much for one person to handle. So we worked out a schedule, some times when we could all kind of pitch in and help out. Another thing that we did, because we were very rural, we turned to our local church. We were very involved in our local church, and we used that avenue for a lot of support. These days, in 2024, I recommend a lot of other resources that we now have. We have the ability to log into the computer, like Champions, our Champions Corner or caregiving.com, and find resources at our fingertips. I volunteer regularly with the Alzheimer's Association. ALZ.org has a huge, vast information source there. And now I know of several support groups and things like that that really would be so helpful in the caregiving journey. Felicia, what are your thoughts?
So I look at assembling the team, my caregiving team, as 3 different buckets. And I'll talk about what I tried to do and then what actually happened. The first bucket that I would think of would be family. And so I'll say, from a family perspective, I had to be very honest. I have an older sister, so they're just the 2 of us. And we just did not click as far as how to go about caring for my parents. I do remember, and I can honestly say, some years before my mother was ever diagnosed, my sister reached out to me and said, I think mommy has Alzheimer's. And I was actually offended by that at that time. And I said, we've been to the doctors. They didn't diagnose her. She doesn't have, we don't know what she has, yada, yada, yada. And then she emailed me at work, which was really upsetting as well. And so we never really talked about it any further or did anything else. Some years later, my mother began to have other things going on. And at that time I got involved. And again, to be very honest, I stepped in and I took over. My mother was living, my sister actually was living in my parents' home at the time. And my husband and I talked and we discussed it, and we moved my parents out of that environment into an environment that was going to be more conducive to their health and to their well-being. And so I automatically, just from that means my sister was sort of out of the picture, as in I assumed care and didn't really look for her to do anything. And honestly, she hasn't done much in the past 8 years. So I didn't have the family support as far as my immediate support. I did reach out to some cousins, other people in the family, but the reality is the conditions and the things that I was dealing with my parents on a daily basis, you really couldn't help, from afar. And so that was kind of the family bucket. So from the family perspective, I had my older sister who, for whatever reason, was not able to help, didn't have the capacity to help in the way that was needed. And then by default, my husband and my children. So that was really our caregiving team. That's the first bucket. The second bucket would be the medical team. I know that I did not like a few of my parents' doctors before I became their caregiver. And so as soon as I assumed care for them, we began to look for physicians, doctors, a medical team that I thought was really going to support my parents, but also support me being involved. I felt even with my father's neurologist, with Parkinson's, that when I began to go to the meetings with the neurologist he had in place, the doctor seemed irritated that I was there to ask questions and to make the appointments last more than the 5 minutes that he typically spent with the patients. And so it's really important to find a good team and make sure that they mesh with your family or those other people that are helping you in the caregiving journey. And then the third bucket is other. And I would say other would be everybody else. I have found a very rich community of support on Facebook. And so I started a YouTube channel. I started a Facebook page for my parents and my caregiving journey. And people began to follow and listen and, just support me and root for us and cheer for us and pray for me and ask me questions and such. And so that's sort of how my team developed. Family was not necessarily the go-to for me. Medical team, really important. And then finding support wherever else you can get it. And for me, that was in my online community.
Thanks, Felicia and Julie. Those are elements of what I had to go through. Family dynamics, medical team, and then the other. Those things are significant, and they come at certain times when you don't expect it. Family dynamics, like me and my brother, we had a hard time kind of agreeing on how to support our dad, and then engaging other family members. The medical team, finding what works, who works best with my dad, and then finding others, like the social media dementia community with me has been very supportive, along with all my support groups that I belong to. So let's move on to Elizabeth. Tell me what works for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part of your question about assembling a local care team, the key word there is team, right? Like we need a team of people. We can't do this all on our own. And I know when we moved Mom to the Atlanta area and I was her primary caregiver, she lived nearby an assisted living. But one of the critical resources for our care team, because my mom had so many multiple chronic things going on and mobility issues on top of that, I used to have to take a half day off work to take her to appointments. And so we found a concierge doctor, which was an amazing support for us, because what allowed us to do is, for example, she had multiple UTIs. I would be able to collect the specimen on my own and bring it in without bringing my mom in. I could text questions to the doctor and expect an answer back in like 15 to 30 minutes. And it wasn't always like, you got to bring her in, so that was an amazing part of our team. But then to add to that, I feel like what was missing is that nobody was seeing me and seeing us as the family caregivers in our fragmented healthcare system. So what tip I would offer to family caregivers to create a strong support network is to create their care team for themselves. And for me, like I was thirsty for education about everything. Like, how do people do this? I do not want to reinvent the wheel. So I learned about a program where I could be a certified caregiving consultant. And yes, it was about being a coach for other caregivers, but first I would needed to coach myself. And so it was really just getting connected to other caregivers and learning more about this process. And I went to this first conference with that group, and I learned about another organization called daughterhood.org. And they didn't have a circle in Atlanta. And I thought, well, we need a circle in a metro area like Atlanta. So I started one back in 2017. But that group, we met monthly in person, and we've been meeting for 7 years. It's been just as much of a help for me as it has been for the other caregivers that hopefully have, attended to really get the information they need. Because I do believe that the best information and the support comes from other family caregivers like y'all.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think you outlined what support is as a team, and it's a team effort. And if you've played in team sports or in high school or in any other kind of environment, you work as a team to support your loved one. but also who's the team that's supporting you, the
Right.
caregiver.
Exactly.
So that's good information. Christina, tell me about what worked for you as building a local care team and a strong support network.
Yeah, sure. Actually, my brother and sister were really helpful in the beginning, in the very beginning. But it was a 10-year care journey. So there was a lot that went on after that first year, right? After that first 6 months. And so, and even when they were helping, I was the main person, right? And so for me, I had to look at outside folks. Like I had to tap into friends. One of the biggest things that really helped me was finding a friend who was actually on a care journey as well, because it was somebody who I could vent to and talk to, and we could share resources, and they understood what I was going through. They weren't telling me you just got to put on your oxygen mask first, but not telling me where to find it and how to use it. Right. And I also found a lot of classes in the community that I went to. And one of the things that I found was actually somebody who knew a lot of the legal stuff that came along with caregiving, because I don't know about you guys, but when I was first a caregiver, I was like, oh my God, am I going to be taken to jail if I leave my mom alone at night? Because the doctors were telling me, every doctor you go to, like every hospital visit, they're going to be like, your mother needs 24-hour care. They always say that. And it's kind of like a go-to when they don't even know really what's going on. Like, it's really okay. My mom would have I don't know, she would have learned how to walk immediately if I was there 24/7 just to get up and kick me out of the house because she wanted some peace, And so having that legal person, who knew about some of that stuff to say, not an actual lawyer, but somebody who knew, I'm not going to go to jail if I leave my mom for a couple hours. Somebody who, knew things because I don't know about you guys, my loved one would, she'd say, I love you 1 minute and throw me out of the house the next just because it was Tuesday, And so, am I going to get in trouble if I leave? These type of things, right? That was somebody who was really helpful, and a support group was really, really helpful. I needed to be around some of my peers who are walking through the same things. Not only was it good to be able to have a place to say, hey, I love my mom immensely, but I would like to quit my job as a caregiver and have somebody to understand. But in that support group, they shared about some of the local resources that were there too. And one of the other things they did was, when you're first a caregiver, they talk about things like, ADLs and PT and OT, and they use all these acronyms, and you're like, what does that mean? Right. And so some of these caregivers who are a little bit further along in their journey, they explained to me, what the difference between physical therapy and occupational therapy was, what the difference between in-home care and home health was, activities of daily living. And if you don't have that type of group and that peer support, I would definitely suggest, I wish I knew about caregiving.com then, because someplace like caregiving.com has that information, right? So I was able to, without the family really, and I was, even if my family wanted to help, they were 3 hours away, right? So I had to really create from the resources I found, and I had to piece it together. Like if I found one resource, I had to say, well, do you know any other resources that might help? And the local resource of the lending closet, was a great part of my care team, because as many of you know, on Medicare, if you're on Medicare, you only get one piece of medical equipment every 5 years. And it also doesn't cover products if your mother or person you're caring for is incontinent. Like there's so many things that became part of that care team, and a lot of them were those resources. So, I just really had to sort of piece it all together. And the biggest thing, though, was finding somebody who was going through that same journey, finding one person, and then finding a group of people, because those people know where to find the resources when I don't. So
Thanks, Christina, for sharing.
Yeah, that kind of brings us to our next question is, I talked about caregiving.com. I didn't know about it then, but now I do. And a lot of people know about caregiving.com now, but how did y'all utilize technology to connect with local resources and support groups? And what platforms were helpful to you guys. So we'll go with Felicia first.
Sure thing. So again, I am going to circle back to my trusty Facebook. I am a Facebook queen and spend a lot of time on Facebook, both professionally and personally. And as a caregiver, what I found was that between working and, still tending to my family and then trying to care for not just one, but two individuals with neurodegenerative diseases, it made and at the time I was actually a minister at my church as well, a new minister at my church. So my time was very short. So I did not have time to go out and sit in a support group or travel to a support group. And so I really relied on technology to find resources for myself. And so I began to search out Facebook groups. So I found general Facebook groups for caregivers. Then I went more specifically and I identified caregiving support groups for people with Alzheimer's, caregiving support groups for people with dementia, for Parkinson's, et cetera. And so participating in those groups was really great for me personally because it allowed me to feel seen, to feel heard, to identify with, and to have other people identify with what I was experiencing. But then also, as people would pose questions or share answers, I was taking notes. Like, oh, you can do that, right? I didn't know that this was a thing. Oh, you can, get hospice, and it doesn't mean that the person that you're caring for is dying. Oh, you can go to this resource. And so a lot of knowledge sharing, knowledge exchange happening within those support groups on Facebook. And then also the ability to share with people who really get it. Because what I found very early, and you probably all have experienced this, is that those that haven't walked in our shoes do not understand. Whether they're being judgmental because they don't understand, or simply because they're not necessarily providing the type of help that you need because they just don't understand. It was so valuable to be in a space, a safe space in these online communities where I could talk to people that did get it. Their situation may not have been exactly like mine, but they got it. And it was so much easier to talk to those individuals. And then also, again, from a technology standpoint, utilizing Facebook to share and to tell my story. I was sort of thrust into caregiving. I did not know when I simply thought I was moving my parents out of their home into an apartment that was closer to my home so that I could help out, that we were in fact becoming full-time caregivers. And so I decided to document that journey, to share again. I said I started a Facebook group, I started an Instagram page, I started a Facebook page for my parents and a YouTube channel, Hanging with the Elderlies, to really give an authentic response to caregiving, to teach people what I was learning along the journey, to show them the ups and downs, some of the, the good things, the great moments with my mother, with my father, but then also some of the more challenging times, some of the times when I was depressed, some of the times when, I would say, I just want to drop kick one of them. Like I want to punch them. Like I want to do these things that you may not feel comfortable sharing with people that don't, that haven't experienced caregiving. So it became cathartic to me. It became an opportunity for me to share and for me to teach and for me to share information. But it also was an opportunity for me to get support. So many people, even when my father passed in December, were like, we miss your father. We miss hearing his stories. We felt like we knew him, like he was our dad. And so social media for me, and Facebook in particular, were the platforms of choice for me from a technology standpoint that allowed me to get what I needed and allowed me to also give to other caregivers without even leaving my home, which made it super flexible around like a really difficult and challenging caregiving schedule.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Felicia. I totally agree with what you were saying. So, Julie, let's go ahead and hear from you.
Well, I already expressed how difficult it was when my grandparents were going through their journey. And so because of that, once we lost them in the early 2000s, I then started to research how I could help other caregivers. So in my journey, I have started a podcast called Aging Gracefully with Julie Roca that is supposed to be a resource, something that's out there so that you can connect to those local resources. Another way that I use the online resources is through caregiving.com. Our town is really fortunate. We have started a pilot program here, and we have a Facebook page, and it's great. There's plenty of interaction there, but I am a member of a lot of other Facebook pages, just like Felicia. I find it very helpful, not only for me, but in my journey for now helping other caregivers to connect. That's another way that I have found. And one of the things that we did here in our town, and I don't know if this is in every town, but you might want to look for it. We have a healthcare networking Facebook page. And in that Facebook page, we're connected to all kinds of resources. So if you connect to something like that, you're going to have all those resources at your fingertips. So lots of great resources online. I spend plenty of time in Facebook, like Felicia, and I'm guessing that we're going to hear that from others as well. What are your thoughts, Elizabeth?
Yeah, well, I spent my professional career in IT, so I'm not like shy from getting my hands dirty and using technology. And honestly, like, I think we all have to embrace technology and look at it as being part of our care team. It's really important. So a couple things that were super helpful was when my parents had many hospitalizations, particularly we used caringbridge.org to kind of keep my vast, humongous family connected and sharing photos and getting updates that way. So I definitely would recommend that one. For me personally, as a caregiver trying to drink from the fire hose, what was useful for me is podcasts. So podcasts have basically their own little search engine. And so putting in keywords in there and seeing what would pop up about whatever issue of the week I was addressing, taking away the car keys, or even today, still with my brother, like I'm learning all about neurodiversity and things like that. So podcasts are definitely a go-to. There's a lot of online directories. So even as a care coach now, like I'm talking to people throughout the US and I want to fast track them to resources. While I might not know people personally, I know some good directories I can go to. So one of them being, my fellow certified caregiving consultant directory, if I want to find someone local that they can connect to there. Another one is like, I'm a certified senior advisor, so CSA.org. People have gone through an added layer of steps to be accredited to work with older adults. And so I feel more comfortable kind of going to that directory to find an elder law care attorney or financial planner, things like that. Apps are amazing. Like there's more and more caregiving related apps that are coming out. One of them I partner with is Connected Caregiver, but there are other ones that might help you with your specific thing. And then last but not least, technology, I would say like email is still great. And specifically like subscribe to the newsletters, whether it's caregiving.com or happyhealthycaregiver.com, whatever your coaches and your people that you are trying to get more educated about, these people are curating information and pushing it to your inbox. And that way you don't have to go searching for it. They've already done the hard work. Like tap into some of the newsletters, I think that can be really, really valuable for you.
That's great advice, Elizabeth. I love that. And Julie, you brought up too, the groups. I think obviously we're Champions Corner here. All of you are caregiving.com champions. In some of these local areas that we've utilized Keys to the Community, and we've gone and we built community there and helped to find local resources. We create hyper local Facebook groups, and Gainesville, Florida is one of them. We have a Las Vegas one, a New England one, and also Indianapolis. And that's where you can find lots and lots of local resources in your area. So thanks for bringing that up, Julie. Carlos, how about you?
I am amazed with Felicia and Julie and Elizabeth. I want to reach out and watch your Facebooks and YouTubes and all the other technologies online, because that's where you gain some significant knowledge about resources and information to educate yourself. For me, technology was a source to investigate and educate myself on my dad's condition. Alzheimer's is a very misunderstood disease, and I was trying to understand what was going on. And then I was also trying to understand what was going on with me. my mental well-being is the utmost importance. But sometimes you get down in the dumps and you get hooked on other distractions on social media or even on the internet. And you don't want to like really kind of tap into that. But like Elizabeth said, sign up for the newsletters. Get notifications on your phone for what other coaches, dementia practitioners, other caregivers are doing for themselves. It's been very helpful for me. When I first started out as a caregiver, I had a stigma to that. I walked into a caregiver support group and no one looked like me. They were much older. And I was feeling very uncomfortable because I was ashamed. I was feeling guilty. I was feeling humiliated because of my dad's condition. But once I stepped in there and was welcomed with warm arms, I felt that was where I needed to be. It was home. And once you get into an environment where everybody's understanding, non-judgmental, and can be relatable, it brings a sense of confidence to your caregiver journey. And that helped me explore even more avenues to get support. Right now, I'm in 6 online caregiver support groups. One's a fabulous poem writers support group where I'm able to utilize my emotions and express them through words on paper and share it with a group of individuals that are artistically amazing. My social media network is expanding, and it's neat to get feedback from others who are going through this journey. And I am able to share what works for my dad and offer an alternative to others. And it makes me feel good when I get some feedback saying, well, that worked for my dad. That worked for my mom. I'm able to offer some support that way and get support when I need it. If I'm on social media and I say, I'm feeling down, well, I'll get a bunch of cyber hugs. And that makes me feel good. It gives me the encouragement to keep on keeping on. So I really appreciate everybody that's like shared their information. I don't know. It's
You're
a beautiful
making me
thing.
leak, Carlos. I'm leaking today.
Yeah, I know,
So,
right?
Yes. I mean, yes. Hugs.
Yeah, and that's what technology is all about. I mean, we're all of us, 5 of us on here right now, and we're sharing some information that wasn't available to us years ago.
Right.
I didn't find out about the Alzheimer's Association right away, or the other amazing organizations. It's just amazing that once you kind of go searching for it, you can find it. You just need maybe a nudge, maybe your friend that says, have you considered a caregiver support group?
Right.
Or having them share a podcast that they may have learned. And then from there, it sparks more intuition to look for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You guys had so many great points. And, for me, I had to kind of look at, what is a resource? When they give you those lists at the hospital, it's like, they think about, like I said, the in-home care and the senior living, but really what is a resource? A resource is anything that is going to help myself or the person I'm caring for financially, mentally, emotionally, physically, or spiritually, right? So, that can be something as simple as a gardener that I can trust that can go into my mother's backyard and not take advantage of her when she's in there, laying in her bed paralyzed, but I've got to run to the store for a minute, right? A resource can be so many things. So for me, I had to really look at really broadening my idea of what a resource was, right? And you guys talked about it a lot. You talked about some of you who share your story on social media. And I think for me, when I started, being vulnerable and sharing my story on social media, what I found was other caregivers came out of the woodworks, right? And so I found that sisterhood and that brotherhood, those caregivers that were out there. And if I was sharing, like Carlos talked about, if I was sharing I was having a rough day, another caregiver would jump on and be like, man, I had that same kind of day and I didn't feel so alone, or, hey, this is what I did in that situation. And, I was able to build that community myself too, and sort of see all those different caregivers on their different journeys and redefine what normal was, right? Having a bad day was normal, right? So, I was able to do that, and podcasts were huge for me. For me on my care journey, just hearing what other caregivers were going through. I just remember the very first time it was right after they told me I had like 6 months to live. I got on Facebook and I looked the word up, caregiver. I was looking for a caregiver group, and I found this one group. And I remember going through and reading some of those posts, and I just kind of watched for a while, and I was like, wow, all of this stuff is normal, right? Because I felt so alone what I was going through, and I felt so ashamed and guilty and all of these things that Carlos and some of you have mentioned. And just seeing that so many people were going through that made a huge difference. And again, if I would have known about places like caregiving.com. And once I found out about places like caregiving.com, Caregiver Action Network, Happy Healthy Caregiver, all of these different things, if I would have known about all of that, it would have made it so much easier. And once I did find out about that, it was probably about 4 years into my care journey when I started finding out about those things. And it changed not only my care journey, but it changed the way I was able to care for my mom. It's like our whole care journey got better, right? It didn't get like magically blissful, but it got better, for both of us. So, thank you guys for sharing that. And we talked about a lot of resources today. And in closing, what I'd like to ask each of you is, if you had to choose the top 3 resources, what would you recommend to other caregivers? And I want to start with Elizabeth.
It's a hard question, but the way that I'm going to think about this is my goal is to help you make it more sustainable, because I think that's when you start getting connected to those resources, Christina, that's what happened. So I want to connect you to 3 resources that I think are going to fast track you to other resources. And so the first one is shameless plug for my podcast, Happy Healthy Caregiver, because you're going to meet other caregivers who are going to share a bunch of resources there. My second resource is going to be a relatively new nonprofit organization called the ACAP community.org. And ACAP stands for Adult Children of Aging Parents. So we started one in the Atlanta area, very educational, topic oriented, so that you can get the information and then take action from that. And I think they're in 9 states, various states. And then the last one I'm going to recommend, we've already kind of mentioned it, is daughterhood.org. And the reason is that is accessible virtual support over Zoom, either topic or ad hoc kind of connection circles that is available to everybody, men too.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. And how about you, Felicia?
So I'm going to take a different approach with sharing some resources. The first one is I would suggest that you reach out to the Council for Aging or the Division of Aging in your state. As I said before, I'm from Philadelphia, and so there was a Philadelphia Council for Aging, and they may have different names, but there are government entities that are in place to provide you with that type of resource for caregiving. And then the second resource that I'll share is for those that are still employed is the Employee Assistance Program at your employer. If your job, check with HR and find out if they have an EAP. You may be able to get resources for caregiving, direction. I actually reached out to get therapy in my first year of caregiving because I didn't know what I'd gotten myself into. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm depressed or if I'm not depressed or what's going on. And I'm watching my parents deteriorate. And so that was really important. And then third is a company called Telemed. And am I pronouncing it correctly? It's TELEMYND. And it is also a source for therapy. And I'm just bringing that up again because we're caregivers And we sometimes need help talking to other people and talking through it. And so that has been a wonderful resource where they're able to match you up with a therapist that you can see virtually.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Felicia. And how about you, Carlos?
Well, I could spend a few days talking about resources.
Right.
One thing is caregiver support groups. I believe that is essential to get immersed into a caregiver support group. Online, in person, you'll get to hear a lot of information, resources, and emotions I think we need to hear. Another resource is a caregiver support coach, someone that can understand where you're at in your caregiver journey and offer solutions. Another resource is men's mental well-being group that I belong to. I'm a local ambassador with Into the Dark Blue in Sacramento, and we talk about men's mental health and well-being. And as a male caregiver, I feel that it is important to reinforce your mental well-being and how you can bond with other males to support your journey.
Those are awesome. Thank you so much, Carlos. And Julie?
Well, I'm going to do what Elizabeth did and shamelessly plug. I would love to recommend my podcast, Aging Gracefully with Julie Roca. But another resource that I have really benefited from over the years is ALZ.org. And one of the things that you can benefit from there is they have a 24-hour-a-day helpline. It's open at Christmas and holidays, and it's open at 2 and 3 in the morning. And it's a 1-800 number. I don't know off the top of my head, but you can find it at ALZ.org. I see Carlos knows it by heart. What they can do is connect you to the local resources. So you have a master's level counselor at the end of the line, and they can help to connect you to those other resources. And then, look around. If you've got a care counselor in your area, or a geriatric care partner, or a senior advisor like I am and like Elizabeth is, we can be a resource for you. We are kind of a cross between a social worker, counselors, real estate agents. I mean, we kind of do a little bit of everything. So look for that in your area. Ask your primary care physician, ask your neurologist. They may know of somebody that does the same thing that Elizabeth does and that I do. So those are my 3.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. And I kind of have, all of you took one of my pieces, so thank you so much. But my favorite resources are obviously care coaches. And I think Elizabeth and Julie talked about it. Care coach is somebody who's been there, done that. They've actually been a family caregiver before, not a professional caregiver, social worker. Some of them are, but somebody who's actually been through the emotions of being a family caregiver, and they can walk you through that, and they can share some of the resources and how to find them, even if they're not in your town. So care coach is really important. Elizabeth, again, can you tell folks how to find a care coach if they need to find one?
Yeah. One of the certifications is through the Caregiving Years Training Academy, and they have a directory on that website where you can go and find one in your area. Although you can find coaches, if you don't need somebody local, you can use any of them, frankly.
Perfect. And then also, the other one is support groups that everybody mentioned. If you don't know how to find support groups and you just need to piece it together, obviously you can look on caregiving.com and find some of the support groups we recommend. Caregiver Action Network is another website that has some support groups that they mentioned. We talked about Daughterhood. Hope Dementia Society, Hope Dementia Support Group has support groups. Cohen Caregiving has support groups. There's all kinds of support groups. Also, if you go on to Facebook and have a group there, you can ask some of them for a local support group as well. And of course, my favorite resource is caregiving.com, right? Being able to go to caregiving.com. There's over 10,000 articles there. There's, podcasts there like the Champions Corner, Real Talk with Real Caregivers, right? And also there's videos and all kinds of things you can find there. And also to follow us on social media, you can find it there. And the champions, right? The champions for caregiving.com, the caregiving.com champions are an amazing resource. And what the champions are, since it is Champions Corner, are folks who have been through the caregiving journey. They are current or former family caregivers, and they understand what it's like to try to find the resources, try to find the support. And they're the eyes and the ears of their city, right? And we've got 110 right now, and we're, hiring more, right? We're in the middle of hiring more. So, that is definitely one of my favorite resources, caregiving.com. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up today. I want to say to everybody, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Champions Corner, Real Talk with Real Caregivers. And you want to make sure to subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss any episodes, like our next episode, where we're going to be talking about the hospice journey and what it's really like caring for a loved one on hospice, because I don't know about you guys, but it was way different than what I thought it was going to be, right? So, and make sure to like and follow caregiving.com on all social media channels. And if you'd like to apply to be a caregiving.com champion, because we are hiring right now, you can go to caregiving.com and apply, or text champion to 360-230-7736. See you next episode. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.